So I'm coming from Ethiopia. Before I go to my presentation, I would like to thank my forefathers. Our forefathers stood their ground and defeated the white people the first time in their history. So it was in Adwa, a place called Adwa, where they managed to defeat the Italians. King Minilik was a king who fought against the Italians. He didn't have trained soldiers, but he organized the country through traditional leaders. And I choose 7 countries and 7 kingdoms from those countries. The reason of the study is, as I was trying to say, King Minilik on leadership, I want to resuscitate that traditional leadership in Ethiopia. Currently, I am spearheading the first forum of traditional leadership in Ethiopia. So before I start to form this association, I wanted to know the practice in other African countries. So this research is a practical research to learn from the experience of other African countries so that we can use those wisdoms to resuscitate the traditional leadership in Ethiopia. So the question I asked myself to do this research is, in the presence of centuries-old traditional leadership system existing in Africa, building and maintaining peace in the continent is still a long way off. That calls for the assessment of traditional leadership system performance and their current contribution to peace building. The findings from these 7 countries, the countries are Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Botswana, and Rwanda. The findings from these 7 countries dictate that without traditional leadership, our African system cannot perform well. Traditional leadership is the bedrock of our own success. As you know, museums in Europe are full of artifacts which was made in Africa. That shows us our traditional wisdom, our indigenous wisdom was at its peak during that time. So learning from that experience and bring it to the modern application is what I was trying to do. So all the participants of the research agreed in one accord that in a traditional leadership system, the leadership is ancestral, hereditary, and rotates within the family. Historically, the head of the first settlers of a village who gave the community a name, who originated or from which the community grew up, is the ancestor of that community, and his offspring remains in leadership. Participants from this research explains that the leadership is the evidence of the connection the current leader has with those preceding leaders, going back to the first master of the first parent of that community. The leader is the connection, kind of bond the community has with his ancestors. The incumbent leader is not seen as an individual, but the epitome of ancestral presentation that the ancestors speak to the community through this leader. When we assess the relation between the traditional leader and the traditional leadership system, we've learned that the traditional leader contributes to the welfare of the community, and the community pay their allegiance to the traditional leader. Almost all of the respondents agreed that the general roles and duties of the traditional leadership in every region includes, but is not limited to, being custodian of the community's culture and tradition, serves as a link between the community and the central government, advocate for the welfare of the community in terms of health, education, security, and shelter. I would like to summarize it because of time. The findings of this research are important indicators to assess traditional leadership system and their contribution to peace building process in the African continent. The findings help to assess the traditional leadership system and show their major potential contribution to the peace building process as contribution made at the community, societal, national, and continental levels. The effectiveness of any leadership has to be measured by the influence and positive contribution it creates among its followers. Traditional leaders, since they are residing leaders seated there in the community, they are ideal to resolve conflict and initiate peace building from the grassroots level up and are able to sustain it. This research has a continental application. The continental unity of traditional leaders is a key for the unification of Africa, because traditional leaders are well able to convince and mobilize the community in a better way than the politicians by incorporating traditional wisdom into the leadership system of the continent. As a conclusion, the findings show that the traditional leadership system immensely contributes its part irrespective of the negative influence that has reigned on it over time. Its survival from the devastating effects of colonialism and the state of being ostracized from secular government thereafter shows its resilience and the kind of support the academia entails and reinforces the participation of the traditional leadership system in a more organized manner. The finding shows that the traditional leadership system found in countries under this study, majority of time have been engaged in peacemaking but rarely participated in peace building. This is because the traditional leadership system are considered as necessary evil rather than guardian angels by their respective government politicians. They are usually requested to be part of the program after the conflict reached its peaks or on the aftermath of heinous crimes. As a recommendation, going forward as a new thought of engagement, measures has to be put in place to strengthen the existing traditional leadership systems, institutionalizing them, supporting them with research by local researchers, and incorporate them in the modern education curriculum, providing protection from political and unnatural interference, preserving their cultural and historical legacies, proper documentation, and supporting them through strategic systems such as constitutional support to become involved in official legislation. Traditional leaders should stand on their ground not only individually but also unified with their associations as the custodian of cultural values, and get the courage to officially express their stance even against the constitution, the country, the administrators, and its whims and caprices, when the cultural values and traditional norms are tampered with in one way or the other. Also, traditional leaders should have association both nationally and continentally that gives them a voice to stand against and condemn atrocities perpetrated against Africans in the diaspora. Therefore, it is recommended to take the strong practices of traditional leadership systems and incorporate them not only as alternative means of conflict resolution, but as a main ingredients of the civil justice system. So after I've done this research, I put it in practice, and now we have regional associations in all the regions of Ethiopia, and we're going to have the first traditional leadership association in December this year. So thank you very much for your attention.